Look at the street. This is Britain 2026. 1 in 5 children here lives in poverty. The NHS has over 7 million people sitting on a waiting list. Young people are leaving not for adventure, but because they genuinely cannot see a future here that works for them. More than 1 in 4 young British people are either planning to leave or seriously think about it. 72% says they would consider building their life somewhere else. Not because they hate Britain, but because they have stopped believing Britain will come through for them. 100 years ago, the same country owned a quarter of the entire planet. I want to figure out what happened in between. Okay, before we go anywhere, I want to tell you about a man named Winston. In 1948, Winston was 22 years old. He was from Jamaica. He had served in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War, fought for Britain, and when the war ended, Britain sent him a letter. The letter said, "We need you. We are rebuilding. Come and help us build it." So Winston packed a bag and came. He arrived in a country that desperately needed him and did not fully want him. Landlords turned him away. Employers told him certain jobs were not for the people like him. He ended up driving buses in Birmingham. He drove those buses for 40 years. His children were born British. His grandchildren were born British. And in 2018, one of those grandchildren got a letter from the Home Office. It said, "You are here illegally. Prove your right to remain." This is called the Windrush scandal, and it is the most honest summary of the Britain's relationship with its own history that I have ever come across. A country that spent 300 years going to other people's lands, that those people had every right to come to its land in return. That tension, that contradiction, that is what this video is actually about. But to understand how Britain got there, we need to go all the way back to how a small wet island off the coast of the Europe ended up running a quarter of the world. Look at this map. The more red you see, the more were controlled by British Empire. All of red highlighted areas were controlled by British. Canada, Australia, India, and every major country you see, all of it British. At its peak in 1920, the British Empire controlled 24% of all land on Earth. It governed 412 million people. That is nearly 1 in every 4 human beings alive at that moment, all answering to the same crown. And it all came from this one island about the size of Michigan. But how does that happen? Because here is the thing. It was not just armies. Every empire in history has had armies. What made Britain different was something more uncomfortable. Britain did not just conquer places, it built systems. System that made British control feel normal, feel inevitable, feel like the natural way things were supposed to be. The clearest example of that system is a story so strange it almost sounds fictional. And it does not start with a king or a general. It starts with a trading company, East India Company. The East India Company was founded in 1600. Spices, that was it. A group of London merchants pooling money to buy pepper and nutmeg from Asia and sell it back home in Europe. 150 years later, it was running India. I want you to sit with that for a second. A corporation with shareholders, a board of directors, profit targets, was governing the most populated country on earth. At its peak, the East India Company had an army of 26,000 soldiers. That was twice the size of the British government's own military. It fought wars, it collected taxes, it executed people, it printed its own currency. All is a private company. And here is the part that genuinely surprised me. The British government was often uncomfortable with what the company was doing. They thought it was going too far, too brutal, too expensive. But the money coming back to Britain was too good to stop it. By 1765, after the Battle of Plassey, the company had control of Bengal, one of the wealthiest regions in Asia. They taxed everything and sent the money home to Britain. Someone did the calculation on what Britain took out of India between 1765 and 1938. The number they came up with was $45 trillion. I had to read that 3 times before I believe it. That money built London. It built the railroads. It bankrolled the Industrial Revolution. And while all of that was happening, people in India were starving. The Bengal famine of 1943 killed between 2 and 3 million people, while the British government continued exporting food out of India to supply its wartime needs. The empire made Britain extraordinary, and it made millions of other people's lives unbearable. Those two things were not separate. They were the same thing. But empire alone does not make you the most powerful country on earth. Plenty of empires have come and gone. What made Britain genuinely different was timing. The Industrial Revolution started here. In the 1760s and 1770s, in the mills of Lancashire and in the mines of Wales, people figured out how to use coal to power machine. For the first time in human history, production did not depend on muscles, steam engines, power looms, steel foundries. Britain had all of it first. By the time France, Germany and America started catching up, Britain already had a 50-year head start. The factories were built, the railway were running, the trade network spanned the globe. Britain was producing 30% of the world's manufactured goods from one small island, and London became the place where every deal on earth was settled. Want to borrow money for railway in Argentina? You came to London. Want to insure a cargo ship sailing from Shanghai? London. Trade in cotton, copper, wheat, rubber? London. Every deal, every trade, every transaction on earth was ultimately priced in British pounds. Britain had not just built an empire, it had built itself into the foundations of the entire global system. And then in the space of about 30 years, it all started coming apart. In 1914, Britain goes to war. It enters as the world's largest creditor nation. The world owes Britain money. Its empire has its largest geographical size. Its navy controls every major ocean. 4 years later, nearly everything has changed. Around 1 million British soldiers dead, 1.6 million wounded, and the financial cost was so catastrophic that Britain went from being the country everyone owed money to a country that owed billions to America. Think about that shift. 4 years. But here is what nobody told the soldiers coming home. Men had come from India, Nigeria, Australia, Canada, the Caribbean, South Africa to fight this war. They had been told the empire was a family, that they were British subjects, that they mattered. They came home to find their country still under British occupation, still being taxed, still being told their culture were inferior. A man from Jamaica who had fought in the trenches of northern France walked home and asked one question: why I'm still not free? The movements that would eventually dismantle the British Empire, they started in that question. They were born in the mud of World War I. The seeds were in the ground. It would take another 30 years for them to fully grow. I want to take you to one specific moment. November 1956, Egypt. Britain has just launched a military operation to retake the Suez Canal after Egypt's president Nasser nationalized it. The canal was the artery connecting Europe to the Middle Eastern oil, and Britain wanted it back. Militarily, they were winning. Then a phone rang. It was Eisenhower, and he was not calling to congratulate Britain. He was furious. Britain had launched a military invasion without telling its most important ally, and Eisenhower decided to make them pay. Not with soldiers, not with threats, with money. He threatened to dump America's holdings of British pounds onto international markets. The pound would collapse. Britain's economy, already stretched thin from 2 world wars, would go into free fall. And he told the International Monetary Fund, do not give Britain the emergency loan it needs, not unless British troops leave Egypt. Britain needed that loan to survive. Within days, the troops withdrew. The military operation had worked, but Britain could not afford to keep what it had won. One historian described it this way: empires do not always fall when they lose wars. They fall when they lose the ability to decide. Britain won the battle and lost everything that came after it. After Suez, no one in the British government could pretend anymore. The empire was finished. Britain was a medium-sized country that needed American permission to act on the world stage. The sun had set. But here is what nobody tells you about what happens after an empire ends. The empire disappears from the map, but it does not disappear from the people. And while Britain was quietly adjusting to its smaller place in the world, it was making a decision at home that would permanently change what Britain looked like from the inside. Britain had a problem after the war. It needed to rebuild fast. Hospitals needed nurses, buses needed drivers, factories needed workers. The NHS has just been founded in 1948 and it needed doctors and staff by the hundreds of thousands. Britain did not have enough people, so the government did something completely logical. It invited people from its former empire, who were legally British subjects, to come and fill those gaps. And they came from Jamaica, from Barbados, from India, from Pakistan, and from Kenya. They built the NHS, they drove the buses, they staffed the post offices, they worked the factories on night shifts. Winston, the man I told you about at the start, drove buses in Birmingham for 40 years, paid his taxes, raised his kids, bought a house, and built a life. Then in 2018, his grandchildren were told to prove they belonged. What came out that year was this. The government had quietly destroyed the landing cards of the Windrush generation, the actual physical documents that proved these people had the legal right to be in the Britain. No documents, no proof, no right to stay. People who had lived in Britain for 50 years were being detained and deported to countries they had not seen since they were children. People lost jobs, lost their homes, some lost access to cancer treatment. The government that wrote the letters inviting Western generation to come had destroyed the evidence those letters ever existed. That is not bureaucratic error. That is a metaphor for something much bigger. But the story of what was happening to Britain does not end there, because at the same time people were arriving to fill the gap in the economy. The economy itself was going through a transformation that would leave marks that are still visible everywhere you look today. By the late 1970s, Britain factories were struggling. Germany and Japan, both rebuilt from nothing after World War II with brand new equipment, were producing better goods more cheaply than Britain could. Steel, cars, textiles. Britain was losing market after market. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher came to power, and she made a fundamental decision about what kind of country Britain was going to be. She decided the future was not in making things, it was in moving money. Coal mines closed, steel plants shut down, manufacturing town across the northern of England, the Midlands, Wales, places that had been the engine of British industrial power for 200 years, were told the future lays elsewhere. London's financial sector was deregulated. The city boomed. Money flooded and the economy grew. But here is the part that rarely gets said honestly. The economy grew in London, and it did not grow in the place that lost everything else. The 1984 miners' strike lasted almost a year. 200,000 miners walked out. The government won, the mines closed, and the communities that had been built entirely around those mines, they never came back. I have been to some of those towns. The high street has more betting shops than anything else. The young people with ambition leave the moment they can. This is not ancient history. These places aren't real. They exist right now. In 2016, they found the loudest way. They knew to say so. June 23, 2016, Britain votes on whether to stay in the European Union. Person vote to leave. The world is stunned. Half of Britain is stunned. But look at where that vote came from. It is not surprising at all. The places that vote most strongly to leave were not the places that had done well in the previous 35 years. They were in the post-industrial towns of the Midlands and the North. The coastal communities, the places that lost their industries in 1980s and were still waiting for whatever was supposed to come next. London voted to remain. Edinburgh voted to remain. The places plugged into the global economy voted to stay plugged in. The places the global economy had walked away from voted to walk away from it. This is not really a story about the European Union. It is a story about what happens when one half of a country stops believing the system is working for them, and the economic consequences of that vote are still landing. Most independent economists agree Brexit reduced British trade with Europe, the country's biggest trading partner. The Office of Budget Responsibility estimated it cut UK trade instantly by around 15%. Today, Britain's economy is growing at around 1% a year. Public debt is at 95% of GDP. Nearly 7 in 10 British people say that they expect things to get worse over the next year. The country is having an argument with itself about who belongs here, about what the economy is for, about what Britain actually is. And right now, nobody has a convincing answer. Here is the thing I kept coming back to. Britain still has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, still has nuclear weapons. Its politicians still talk about Britain's global rule, its spatial relationships, and its place at the top table. And at the same time, 1 in 5 British children is growing up in poverty. The NHS has 7 million people on waiting lists. Young people in their 30s cannot afford to buy a home in the city where they work. At same point, a country has to look honestly at the gap between the story is telling about itself and the reality most people are actually living. The gap is where almost all of Britain's political dysfunction is coming from right now. The debates about immigration are real. The pressure on housing and public services is real. The frustration about wages and opportunities is completely real. But the honest version of this conversation, the one British politics almost never has, requires saying something out loud. British built its wealth through an empire. That empire took enormous value out of countries across Asia, Africa, and Caribbean. Those same countries are now sending their people to Britain. The relationship between Britain and its former colonies did not end the day the flags came down. It just stopped being written on the map. And a country that cannot look that truth in the eye will keep having the same arguments in different forms until it does. Winston died in 2004. He never got an apology. He never saw the Windrush scandal make the front pages. He never heard a minister stand up in parliament and say, "We got this badly wrong." He just drove his buses, paid his taxes, raised his kids. Britain is still genuinely one of the most extraordinary countries on earth. World-class universities, a legal system trusted globally, a culture that reaches every corner of the planet, a health service that despite everything remains one of the most remarkable institutions any country has ever built. But being extraordinary in the past is not a plan for the future. Britain did not just lose an empire, it lost the story it told itself about who it was, and it has not found a new one yet. That is the hardest thing any country ever has to do. Not survive a war, not recover from an economic crash, but sit down and decide from scratch what it actually stands for. Britain is in the middle of that question right now. Winston knew who he was. He knew why he came. He knew what he was struggling. He knew what he was building. The country he came to build is still figuring that out.